Hey, Scott from MyGrowthRings.com. Here once again is in the future home of my shop, which thank goodness is starting to take shape. You can see we have insulation in the walls and ceiling and more great things to come. All right, this video is about these two machines, which from your distance may look exactly alike, and they're very, very close. This is the Shopsmith Power Station. It's a variable speed stand. The Power Station was introduced in the 1990s for a couple reasons. One was to make it possible for owners of Shopsmith tools to free up their Shopsmith Mark V from a variety of accessories. I mean, maybe you've grown to the point where you've got a larger space and you can start dedicating some stands. But with this, we only need one stand because it's variable speed. It'll take us all the way down to 875 RPMs and all the way up to, and I have it written down, 4,375 RPMs. So with this, we can power the bandsaw, the belt sander, the strip sander, the scroll saw, a pretty large number of accessories that might normally be mounted on the end of your Mark V. Now, let me tell you one that I would never run on this machine. That is the jointer. Not only do I know that I'm going to need my jointer while I'm doing sawing operations, and while the Shopsmith Mark V is running at sawing speed, the lower spindle, the one that drives the jointer, is running at the appropriate speed for my jointers. They really go hand in hand. Unfortunately, we don't get those kind of speeds with the Power Station or the Crafter Station. So for me, jointer's a no-go on these machines. That said, I love having these in my shop because they have freed my machine up to allow that jointer to just live there. So let's take a look at what we have here. We have essentially a headstock. This headstock contains a spindle that's very similar to your quill, but probably the most important thing to note if you own Shopsmith tools is this is spinning backwards. If you think about it, the spindle on the left-hand side, the one that you run your accessories on, it runs clockwise. While if you look at the quill end of your Mark V, that spindle runs counterclockwise. So at least as you're looking at it, I guess if you're looking down, it's turning clockwise. It just depends on your perspective. Anyway, point is, this end turns the opposite of your quill. So that means you can run a lot of things on here, things that would normally be powered on the left side of your headstock. Some things you can't do. You can't, for example, put a saw blade on here because it would be set up to run backwards. So that wouldn't work at all. Now we do have another spindle over here. If I rotate this little cover, I have the ability to add things like drum sanders, buffing wheels, things like that. There's no way to attach any kind of a guard or anything here. It's simply just access to a spindle. Let's take a look at that variable speed action, and this is a noisy machine. Let's just admit that up front. It's loud. Let's try it. So we loosen this knob and gently move this lever through the speed ranges. When we're happy, lock the knob. Turn the speed down by loosening the knob, bringing the lever back down to low. How we're accomplishing this is what's really crazy. We'll pull the cover off and take a look at this in our follow-up video. Now over on this side, we have something of a carriage. By moving this lever, we can move the carriage in and out. And that's important because we're going to add accessories to this carriage by dropping them into these holes. Now there are with set screws here on the face for this lower level, and for accessories that need to be mounted here, I've got set screws here on the side. Now what accessories would be mounted there? Well, there's not many. Any of the accessories that are designed to run off of the lower spindle of the Mark V, high-speed tools, so that would be the jointer, that would be the scroll saw, and that would be the old-fashioned sprayer, one made by Magna back in the 1950s. As I said, I'm never going to mount my jointer to this, but I might want to mount my scroll saw. So the scroll saw is going to mount up high there. All the other accessories drop down into that lower position. And then we use the standard coupling. And we use it in the exact same way we use it on the Mark V, with the headstock side facing the headstock, the other side on the accessory. And we just bring them together, align the splines. I'm going to flip that lever and that locks it in. And like that, we are now powering the strip sander. Currently that's running at 875 RPM. We can crank it up and lock it in at whatever speed we like. Now, to the best of my knowledge, there have been 3 major changes in this carriage, the part that actually holds your tools. The very first version was simply this casting that you see right here. After some time, they found that this was just a little bit too wobbly, so Shopsmith introduced this steel bracket that this carriage would mount on. That was actually available as a retrofit, and that spread out the load further and towards the bend here on the corner of the base, which definitely stiffened things up. After they proved that concept, they moved on to a whole new casting that went all the way to the edge. That beefier casting can be seen here in my crafter station. Now, they did introduce this as a running change to power stations as well. So essentially that is the power station. I can put a sanding disc on this machine. Shopsmith even sold a variation of the lower saw guard of the model 510. The 510 model Mark V has a much larger lower saw guard which can accommodate the 12-inch sanding disc. And so they modified that to fit on the end here, but hey, where's our table? Well, they'll sell you an accessory table, one that would be used on the end of your Mark V, and you can use that in either one of those positions for disc sanding. So all of these things that are kind of sort of like a Mark V, but not quite like a Mark V, led a Shopsmith salesman named Mike Young into thinking that, why don't we make this thing do those other things that the Shopsmith Mark V can do, at least some of them. That idea led Shopsmith to this idea for the crafter station. Now, the crafter station does a couple things exactly the same as the power station because it is essentially the same machine. It still has this movable carriage. It still has the headstock with the variable speed on the front. And by the way, I have this turned around backwards for a reason. I have an on-off switch here, but you may have noticed there's an on-off switch over here too. You're getting ahead of me. So everything from this point of view is exactly the same as the power station. What's different is Shopsmith added this part right here. It's sort of a mounting bracket that allows you to mount onto this machine the main table of the Shopsmith Mark V. So with a lower guard and the saw blade installed, we're just going to lower the table in place. And it drops in right over the blade. What I currently have installed on this table is the standard Shopsmith Model 510 table insert, same as the 520. This is one of the inserts that came with the power station. And you'll notice if I overlap them that the slot is quite a ways off center. So if we put this in, you'll notice that the blade is absolutely centered on that slot. What's up with that? Well, for a couple reasons. Shopsmith made unique inserts for this machine, and part of the problem is with the standard Mark V, when we tilt our table, that slot is going to move a little bit to your right, and we can accommodate that by moving the quill out. Well, this doesn't have a quill, and so Shopsmith made several, I think there were 3 different inserts with the slot in a slightly different position depending upon what angle you were cutting. Yeah, it's crazy. Now into this, we will then add, to this we just drop the upper saw guard in. It clamps into the jaws of a clamp in the lower saw guard, and that's it. We're now set up for sawing. Of course, you're going to need a miter gauge, so it came with a Shopsmith miter gauge. And of course, you're going to need a rip fence, so it came with the Mark V 510 rip fence. None of this addresses a big problem we have, though, and that is that this machine turns the wrong way. It rotates the wrong way. What Shopsmith did was they took advantage of the fact that the motor that was in this machine could be rewired to run in reverse. To do that, it required a little bit of additional work, and in fact, Tom from Woodshop Nerdery, I seem to mention Tom a lot because Tom's doing some really neat things. Tom actually converted a power station to a crafter station, building his own support to hold the table, cutting a new switch location in the headstock, as well as adding the circuitry that would be required in order to switch this from one rotation to another. His conclusion was don't do it. I absolutely agree. A couple very important best practices. I only have control of the variable speed from the other side of the machine. So does that mean I need to turn it on here and then go to the other side of the machine or reach over the other side of the machine to make my speed adjustments? This is a mystery because the instructions tell you in the fine print at the very beginning, they tell you to always turn the speed dial down before you turn it off. I ain't doing that. I'm going to take this sucker up to table saw speed, I'm going to turn it off, and then I'm going to control it from over here on this switch. This switch is going to make the saw blade turn in the proper direction. You see it's moving forward. Where if I flip the switch over here, that saw blade would be running backwards. Obviously a bad thing. In fact, kind of a best practice is you have removable switches on this machine, put one away, and just use one switch. And that way, you know if I'm setting this machine up for table saw functions, that this is the side I'm going to be using it. I can install that switch, and then I can't accidentally turn the switch on the opposite side of the machine. But let's turn this thing on and take it up to full speed. And that is table saw speed. Turn it back on now. Now the risk we take is it draws a lot more amps when you're turning it on at full speed. So household current, you might struggle to power this machine if it's turned on to full speed. Anyway, that's the way I would set it up, and that's the way I would use it. Vibration and noise was discussed in pretty great detail a couple years back on the Shopsmith forums. I'm going to link to that thread in the video description here. I encourage you to check that out if you own either of these machines. So why did this machine fail? Well, to hear Mike Young tell the story, Mike believes that some folks at Shopsmith were maybe a little jealous of it because it was selling so well against the Mark V. My opinion is it just doesn't work well. It has way too low horsepower for most of the things that you're going to want to do with a table saw. And as I mentioned, it's not the right speed for the jointer. So using this hand in hand with, oh, wait a second, how can I run my jointer with this table saw? I can't. I would have to take it completely apart. And I often am jointing between saw cuts. Yeah, it was just an idea that never should have happened. Now, I did have an idea for how to make this machine work. It could work, actually. In fact, it could be a very good machine. But I guess that's for another day. Look forward to your questions, comments, cheap shots. We'll follow up with some Q&A. And as I mentioned, we're going to have to do a deep dive into the maintenance of this machine because there are some weird things that we have to do to maintain this machine, and that deserves its own video. All right, make it a great day.